Hey guys, welcome back to Learn Python the Hard Way. Today we're going to focus on exercise 29 and we will learn about the if statement and if conditions. And as always, you can find the link to the current chapter, the current exercise in the description below. This is part of the paid section of the book, so you'd either need to purchase the book or alternatively, of course, feel free to just follow along with the video and type along with me. So in this exercise, we are going to learn about if statements for the first time. And to get started, we have an exercise here. Let's start and actually type out the code in here. And to do that, we can, of course, open our terminal window, which we can do from Spotlight, for example, by just typing in terminal. And once we open that, we can navigate to the correct folder. And from here, let's open a new file. I'm using Visual Studio Code, so I'm going to type in code space and then the name of the exercise, so exercise 29.py for Python. And let's confirm, and this is going to open a new Python file. Here we can now start out and type in the code. So first of all, we have a variable called people, which we set equal to 20. We have a variable called cats, which is equal to 30. And we have a variable dogs, which is equal to 15. And now we're going to start typing out our if statement. So we type out if people is less than cats. And then we indent 4 space characters, print too many cats, exclamation mark, the world is doomed. Next we type if people is greater than cats. We print out another string, not many cats. The world is saved. We compare people to dogs, so if people is less than dogs, let's print out the world is drooled on. And if people is greater than dogs, let's print the world is dry. Alright, after that, we're going to increase dogs by 5. So initially we had a value of 15. Now we are increasing it by 5, so to 20 in total. And now we have some additional if statements. If people is greater than or equal to dogs, then print out people are greater than or equal to dogs. And if people is less than or equal to dogs, then print out people are less than or equal to dogs. And finally, if people is equal to dogs, so if the value for people is equal to the value of dogs, then print out people are dogs. All right. So let's save this here. And if you think back, that was also the practice exercise that we did a while ago, where we wrote out all the codes that we learned about, and we also typed out those if statements, even though we didn't technically learn about them yet. So next, once we saved our file here, let's go back to our terminal. And we can now execute our file by typing in Python 3 space and then the name of the exercise. And let's compare the output to the solution output here. So we first of all get too many cats, the world is doomed, the world is dry, people are greater than or equal to dogs, people are less than or equal to dogs, people are dogs. So let's take a look at our code here. And what happens here is, of course, that we are using the equality operators that we learned about in the previous exercise, along with the Boolean statements. And we are comparing the value for people, for example, to cats. And we do the same for people and dogs. And we see whether the value is smaller than the other value. So if the value for people is smaller than the value for cats, and then we print this out. So in our case here we have people, we have a value for 20, and for cats we have a value of 30. Since 20 is smaller than 30, this first statement evaluates to true, and therefore we print out that first line. But the second line here is of course false, because people has a value of 20 and cats has a value of 30. So 20 is greater than 30, that statement is false, and therefore this does not print out. And therefore we can see which of those expressions are true, and only those are then printed out. And what we do down here is we increase the value of dogs by 5. So instead of a value of 15, we then have a value of 20. And before, when we compared people to dogs, so people has a value of 20, dogs has a value of 15. So if we compare that, 20 is smaller than 15. That's false. So this statement was not printed out. But the reverse is true, so people is greater than dogs, because 20 is greater than 15. So we print out the world is dry. After that, when we increase the value from 15 to 20 for the dogs, actually people and dogs have the same value, both evaluate to 20. And now if we compare people to be greater than or equal to dogs, that is true, because 20, while it's not greater than 20, it's greater than or equal to 20, because 20 is equal to 20. So we print out this line. We print out the next line as well, because 20 is also smaller than or equals to 20. And finally, of course, 20 is equal to 20, so therefore we print out the last line. So that's the exercise script itself. Let's now take a look at the studied rules. So in this section, we try to guess what we think the if statement does and what it evaluates true. So in the first exercise here we have the question, what do you think the if statement does to the code under it? So that's what we just talked about. It basically evaluates the Boolean expression. So it evaluates whether, for example, people is smaller than, or the value for people is smaller than the value for cats. And if this evaluates to true, then actually the code under it gets executed. Otherwise, it's ignored and the code under it is never executed. Second study rule question, why does the code under the if need to be indented for spaces? So we learned about that before when we worked with functions, that in order to define what's part of a function, we need to indent the lines under the function definition by 4 spaces. Or technically speaking, we don't have to indent it by 4 spaces. We could also use 2, but 4 is the standard. And then whatever is indented to that extent will be part of the function definition. It belongs to the function body, basically. And in order to make clear what actually belongs to our if statement, we need to indent it this way. So if we remove the indentation here and saved it, we can already see there's an error here. Now if we try to execute this, we will get an error, and actually an indentation error, because it expects the code to be indented. What we could do, however, is we could indent it by 2 spaces. That's not recommended because it's really not good style, but it would still execute in this case. But in general, we should always make sure that we indent it by 4 spaces. And here in this case, my tabs are set to 2 spaces, so 2 tabs are 4 spaces, so that we have the standard indentation. And we already answered the third study question, what happens if it isn't indented? Then, as we saw before, we get that indentation error, because now it cannot figure out what should be part of the if statement, because that indentation is missing. Can you put other Boolean expressions from exercise 27 in the if statement? Try it. So we can do that. We could, for example, say, let's put this here at the bottom. If, let's take people is equals to cats. So we already know that this here evaluates to false. We already know that cats has a value of 30 and people has a value of 20. So this will evaluate to false. But what we can do is we can add a not in front of it. So in order that would change it from false to true, because we have not false, which evaluates to true. And then we print out the statement here at the bottom. So let's double check that. Let's print out the code again. And now we can see that line here is printed as well. So that's one example of how we can use additional Boolean expressions, keywords, to actually evaluate a statement to true or false, and then based on that do something, for example print out a new line here. And finally, what happens if you change the initial values for people, cats and dogs? So that really depends, of course, to what we change it to. For example, if we change cats to 10, now cats is smaller than people. So this means in this case here the first line will no longer be executed because people has a value of 20. And if we take a look at 20 is less than 10, that is false now. So the first line no longer is printed out, but the second line will be printed out. So people is greater than cats would now evaluate to 20 is greater than 10, which is now true. And therefore we print out not many cats, the world is saved. So let's just check that. And now we can see that indeed now the first line is no longer printed out, but the second line is printed out. And in a similar way, of course, we could also change the values for cats or for dogs, for example, and that would impact the output that we would get here for the various if statements and the print statements connected to those if statements. So finally, let's take a look at a common student question. What does plus equals mean? Which is the expression we're using here for dogs plus equals 5. So this code is actually shorthand for the following. So dogs plus equals 5 is the same as dogs equals dogs plus 5. But we can basically save a couple characters and just remove dogs from here. And instead we type this. So it's just a way to save some characters. So here, just more generally, x plus equals 1 is the same as doing x equals x plus 1, or in our case, dogs equals dogs plus 5. But it involves less typing. You can call this the increment by operator. The same goes for minus equals and many other expressions that we'll learn about later. So we saw before, for example, that we can also do divides equals, and that would have the same effect, or multiplies equals. So there are a number of different operations that we can use that with. Alright, so that's it for exercise 29, and see you guys in the next video with exercise 30.